Well, welcome back. Welcome back. So before we get into opening the door to not knowing in relationships, I just wanted to ask if there were any questions or anything left over from the earlier session, or anything that came up for you during the break that you want to ask before we get started on another piece of this topic. Yeah, Ben.
I felt like a lot of resonance with the story about penumbra and shadow. I feel like I've been in a place really for the last couple of years where I've been sort of agonizing over life path choices. And really having a lot of trouble discerning, like just wanting to know the right way to go. And asking myself, like, do I know and I just don't want to admit it? Do I this, the whole thing, it just feels like it just feels very jammed up inside, I think. And nothing really feels clear or right. And there's just a lot of stuckness about it. And I don't really know, it just feels very lost, I think. And I don't know if I'm looking for some kind of certainty that's maybe not coming, or sort of what, but I just feel the need to kind of put that out there and see if you have any thoughts.
So if I am hearing you correctly, there's something that's trying to make sense of the past, right or wrong.
And actually more sort of like, where do I go from here? Like steps to take towards the future. Like, where do I go from here? Big sort of decisions about career and things like that.
Uh-huh. Well, the truth of the matter is we don't know about the future, do we?
No.
So the more we can live in the present, the more we'll be open, and you'll be open to how you feel moved. You may feel moved to explore this path or that path, and then one will present itself, whether you think you've decided it or not. And in terms of sort of how the past fits in, it seems to me that life is always moving due to causes and conditions, moment by moment. And those causes and conditions we attribute blame or honor to personal decision making. But is there a person deciding, or is there just a decision that's made from moment to moment based on the causes and conditions of that moment?
Yeah, I think there's a very clear, it's like there's this sense of like, I have to figure it out.
Yes.
And that seems like maybe the sticky thing here.
Well, sure. I mean, and we've all been in that situation where there's something that feels important that we feel like we need to figure out. And yet, if we look in the past and then compare it to right now, there are an awful lot of things that just got figured out without our trying, right? So sometimes just relaxing about those kind of, I've got to figure it out, lets us come back into this mind that's open, not to know. And as soon as we're open not to know, then something is freer to present itself or not. And if it doesn't present itself, then I would say it's not time yet for that to become clear. If it were clear, we would move in that direction. But then there's this there's this sense of, I really don't know. I don't have clarity. And so as one of the lines in the Tao says, can we wait until the mud settles? Do you know?
Yeah.
And that takes some patience and some openness to not knowing.
Yeah. That makes sense. And that has been my experience in other settings, that like when I know I know.
Exactly. Exactly. And as I said, I think earlier, sometimes this knowing from the deeper dimension of ourself, it doesn't present itself until it's actually time to know. It doesn't give us the 5-year plan.
Yeah.
Or maybe even the 5-minute plan. Like right now, who knows what we're going to be talking about in 5 minutes, or how it will land or whatever. But I mean, I can feel compassion for the place you're in, because we've all felt that. We've all been in situations where just we feel like there's a current moving. And I guess that would be another thing to kind of look at, because if we use that well-worn image of the ocean, which in its depth is very calm and peaceful, and then on the surface it can be very turbulent, or it can be calm, but this that's moving in a confused or turbulent manner is still water. It's still the same essence of the deep. But if you look a little bit more down from the wave of experience, you might say, or the wave of confusion, you might be able to just feel like there's a current,
Mm-hmm.
because probably in this moment, you're not anticipating being an Olympic boxer.
Correct.
Right? I mean, I don't know, maybe you are one, but there are things that we're not, the current is not going certain directions, right? And so you may feel like it may be moving, not with enormous clarity, but at least there's a hint, there's a flavor.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, and I think it's so easy. What I notice is it's so easy for even that to get kind of co-opted. I think it's like, because then it's like, okay, well, I've got to discern the movement of the
Exactly.
But I also think it's helpful to just recognize that there's not, I don't know, it feels important for me to not like absolutize that there's not like a right or
Good.
here.
Absolutely, because that's mind driven, isn't it?
Yeah.
The meaning and the judgment and the interpretation is all mind driven, which doesn't mean it's wrong, but it doesn't tell the whole story at all. So sometimes just being willing to say to ourselves, I don't know. Or you say to that deeper dimension, you drop a question into the bowl of unknowing, and it may or may not deliver an answer immediately, but there's an openness in that not knowing. And there's an openness in feeling like maybe I, as who I've taken myself to be, have to decide. I have to figure this out. And sometimes, I mean, I know in the past when I've been really up against a dilemma that just didn't seem to, there was a feeling there that I just didn't know, and I wasn't sure which way to go. And sometimes then just surrendering, I might have a dream that night that would, somehow make things clearer to me. I mean, it doesn't always happen. It's just that it feels to me as though we're more available when we're surrendered to not knowing. And then we're available. So, I mean, this is our day together, is hopefully getting more comfortable with not knowing. Yeah. Anyway.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Anything else from this morning that wants to kind of hope for a little clarity before we move on?
Sila, go ahead and unmute yourself if you like.
Sure. Hi, Dorothy. This is the first time I'm sitting with you live, and it's the first time that I was led through the come back to your home ground teaching that you gave, and I think that was really important for me. It was one of, maybe not the first, but certainly one of the rare experiences where I'm not trying, Because the way you said it and didn't give any instructions, you didn't say go down to your belly or go to your heart or go to this place or that. And the trust in which, you'll know, as it turned out, was true.
Yeah, right. Who would have thought, huh?
Yeah, honestly, I had not thought that. And because I had not thought that, it was not happening, or I was not seeing it. And when I don't know, came back to, surrendered to, relaxed into, whatever it is, was in home ground, something that struck me, and I don't know if how you think about this or how you experience this, but something that struck me was, like, that is the place of not knowing. Earlier when we were doing the not knowing, that felt much more cosmic and outside of myself. I thought it was cosmic and outside of myself, even as I was getting a taste of it. But then in the home ground, it was the same thing. It made it easier for me it was more like containable, or it was more sustainable. It was a more sustainable, more personal relationship with not knowing, if that makes sense.
Sure. That cosmic openness, presence, whatever we want to call it, is also our home ground.
Yeah.
Not separate, but the experience can be whatever it is, and so when we begin to really experience that felt sense in our own experience as a body mind, we might say, well, then it can feel much more intimate. It's not like out there.
Mm.
Right? It's right in here, where we maybe least expect it, but here it is.
Yeah. And I guess the thing I wanted to ask was, if you could weave it in at some point, maybe the penumbra and shadow story also really stayed with me, and this control versus power, or thinking that not having control takes away our power, felt very, very important. And maybe we'll come back to it, or maybe it'll open up. But
well, in some way, you're speaking about it in a way right now when you say, I could feel this in myself when I was invited to my home ground. And that was a much more, for you, an intimate, and perhaps we could use the word powerful experience than thinking of it as kind of out there, the infinite sky, it was right here and now. And when we're moving from that place because we've encountered it and we've stayed awake, to that dimension, then there's more freedom to move from there. And that freedom to move from there holds with it, I think, the power of, in the Buddhist tradition, there's right view. Well, right view is actually no view. It's no fixed view. It's the view from the depths, we might say, the view that knows we're at one, the view that has the intelligence and wisdom and compassion to move as it does based on the circumstance, because there's not just one right answer for one right question. Anyway, we'll see how it moves as we move along. But when I think about the power of this in relationship, it's the power to see ourselves, not as other. And that's what we'll be moving into in a moment. But anyway, thanks. Thanks. We'll see. Yeah, Chantal has got her hand up, and maybe you can unmute yourself. Hello there. I get to see your face. It was only the little black square on Sunday.
That's right. I've been looking forward to this all week.
Oh, good. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you in person as well. And I'm looking forward to you waving your magic wand with my question again, like you did last Saturday or Sunday. I really resonate with the not knowing, and I actually love that and delight in it. And where I'd like some assistance is, and I'll say the context that fits here is in my 20s, I heard one of my masters say, my gurus say, when you can be equally with the positive as well as the negative, then you're free. And the freedom, that's my thing in life, is, that really draws me and I'm really attracted to. So I was like, whoa, that sounds amazing. But now I'm having a really challenging experience with that. And what it is my question is, how do I be in the not knowing when I'm having dry eye, which it's like needles poking in my eyes, which is why I was off this morning, and chronic fatigue, which knocks, it puts me out of functioning. I don't have access to my brain, my will, my physical energy. So how do I be in the not knowing, truly be in the intimacy of not knowing with that?
Well, you're probably already in the not knowing, right? I mean, you don't know when this stabbing in the eye feeling is going to come upon you, when you're going to be really too tired to function, when your head is going to be fuzzy, or in those moments when there'll be clarity. You already don't know, right?
Yes, I love how you reframe things. That's true, but and my experience is because it's not happening, I think, oh, I'm done with that.
Well,
I've done.
No matter what we're talking about, because part of this journey is a wearing away of our egoic sense of who we are, the separate sense of who we are. And that's humbling, because we will always be invited to a deeper recognition, of how our mind is trying to usurp the power that's beyond the mind. It can't create this, but it thinks it should try to be this when it already is this. But it's already this in its limitation, we might say. So the more you can see, any of us, the more we can see the limitation of our own mind, and particularly of our own identified mind, the more freedom we'll have, regardless of the situation. Because in your experience, Chantal, even when your mind feels fuzzy and you don't feel well and so forth and so on, is there something already quiet, open, present? The knowing of your experience itself, whatever words work.
If I answer right now, I can answer just from my cognitive mind. I don't have access to what I really feel like my eternal self. Or
okay. I mean, good. I mean, that's being honest, and that's one of the hallmarks of spiritual maturity. Is our willingness to really be honest, to know that we don't know, or to not be willing just to give an intellectual answer if in fact that's not our actual experience. So even when you're doing this with your hands, it feels like there's something that it's pointing to. This that's open. It's open. It's open around you right now, is it not? There's open space.
I can feel it now. I can feel
okay.
that I'm the spaciousness.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we just you can just imagine, or maybe better than imagine, begin to feel that openness for the moment is actually what's seeing from your own experience, from your own eyes, from your own being. There's something that sees the experience.
I'm feeling a little opening, and if I can throw out my two resistances so I can be present. um the one is, oh, I'm missing out, because I love to live life to the fullest, and so I would be out, doing this retreat from my hammock in the park in the sun, and I had to stay inside for a couple of days, and the second one is, it shouldn't be happening, and if I'm going to be intimate with it, I'm going to be at peace, and I'll be able to go into the pain and have it disappear. That's the last one is the big main one.
Well, that's the fantasy, that if I'm at peace with conflict, it will mean there will be no conflict. Sometimes that is true. Sometimes it isn't true. Just like this morning, Victoria, or whatever time of day it was where you live, Victoria was talking about, even though her mind was going off, there was a sense of something was okay with that. Something was already settled, despite the fact that the mind was having all kinds of lovely, ideas, fantasies, imaginings, and creativity, and so forth. And see, the freedom is not freedom from. We all want it to be freedom from anything that the mind doesn't want to be here, but what's here is here. Our wanting it to be otherwise doesn't necessarily mean that it will be otherwise. So part of the freedom is realizing there's something that's free to have the experience of this moment, whatever it may be. It's not just freedom from, it's freedom to. So we have the freedom to experience what we'll call death. If you want to go to that extreme. We have the freedom to experience what we call birth. We have the freedom to experience the whole range of human emotion and thought and innovation and creativity and all of the things that we wish weren't part of the human experience. But the mind lives in duality. It lives in opposites. And there's no health without illness. There's no up without down. There's no right without wrong. They define each other. And so when we're only wanting to look at, have the good, the beautiful, and the true be the only thing that's here, that's not the wholeness of being, is it? And we all get to find out in our own experience, that the dark and the light is part of life. And the sooner we can accept that that's true, it doesn't mean we'll enjoy the moments where we're not feeling up to par, We're not going to necessarily enjoy that. But there'll be something that's okay with it being here. And that what's okay with it being here is not necessarily, well, it isn't the identified mind ever. It's not going to be okay, probably. But when that identified mind drops itself, it gets subsumed in the moment by the mind that's not identified as some separate self, then it's okay. So that's why whatever our practices might be, or our experiences might be of looking, feeling, sensing, what that deeper, unlimited, infinite potential is that's in each one of our hearts, our being, our existence, then more and more we're invited to align with that.
So what I'm hearing is that I'm being called into knowing more of the time that I'm the space or spaciousness through which whatever experience is arising, and also being held by that space.
Yes, and that space is never separate from what's arising. And that's, that's another piece, because many of us have been taught, and there's a usefulness to this, but, some of you have heard you know, whatever the discomfort is, whatever the thoughts might be, whatever the confusion might, just let them pass like clouds through the sky. The sky is unmoving and the clouds will just pass by, you know, and yet there's a subtle division in that, isn't there?
Mm.
What if the clouds in the sky are made of the same essence? See, now we're not here. We're seeing that they're same. You can have a thought. Let me put it the other way. You cannot have a thought without awareness of it. You can have awareness without thought. So in that sense, they have different properties, but awareness will never be separate from your knowing that you're having a thought or a bad day or pain in the body. The knowing of experience is this flight of awareness. So I'll let you just play with that for a little while.
Okay. That's so helpful. You poured a lot of, you know, water and freshness here for me to be with, and I
Okay.
feel it shifting. So thank you for this.
Good.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, it's good to see your face.
And
And
sorry
your
if my
smile.
camera goes out. It's my camera.
I understand. Well, we got to see your face and your beautiful smile, at least part-time.
Thank you.
So I want to just move along to a relationship, because it feels like this is an area where many of us have discovered challenges along the way. And I want to just start by giving you a quote from Krishnamurti. He said, one of the most radical things is not to have an image of a mountain, a flower, a person, yourself. So if we're really interested in looking into this from don't know mind, or from the mind that actually sees clearly, would be the same, we can see that images are often what we're relating to. In fact, if you bring to mind right now in your memory someone, friend or foe, that memory is an image, is it not? Because that person is not right here and now in front of you. So we're relating in our memory to image. But often it goes further than just relating in our mind to images. We actually are with someone and we're relating to the image and not to the here and now moment. The image that this person is this way or that way. The image that we know, you know, that somehow, because you're this or that in my mind, that then it contains a whole host of preconceptions about what it means to be a this or a that from the image that I'm holding. And so what's it like to actually just observe, be present without an image when we're with a person we know or a person that we don't know well? Can we have a relationship without depending on the image that we have? And if we could, we would be in the here and now with that, in that relationship. And that could be with ourself, or the image we have of a self, or the image we have of an other. And there are a couple of stories I want to share with you. I'm in a book club, and I recently read for that book club a memoir by a woman named Riva Lehrer. She's an artist who was born with spina bifida, had about 40 some operations along the way, was in a school for disabled kids, you know, eventually made it through college and became an artist and a professor and so forth. And she became extremely interested in, she was a portrait painter. Anyway, she became very interested in painting or drawing portraits of people who had disabilities. And it was really fascinating because you saw the pictures that she would draw, and part of what she did, and people had to agree to be her subjects for this, but she would have these long conversations with various people, various kinds of disabilities, and get to know them in that way of having a deep and heartfelt conversation. And then an image would come into her mind that she would begin to paint. But the way she did these paintings is she would paint or draw for like 2 hours as the person was sitting. And then she would leave her studio, leave her home, wherever they were, and ask the person who she was doing a portrait of to make whatever changes or add whatever they wanted to her painting, so that it was a shared phenomena as it ended. At any rate, these paintings, these drawings were shown in various galleries. And she just talked about a few of the comments she heard. And just for a little context, there was a couple that she knew. They were both in wheelchairs. He had more paralysis than his wife. And so the portrait that she painted of the two of them, both in their wheelchairs, the wife had taken his hand and put it on her knee. The husband wasn't able to lift his arm or his hand to do that, but she did it herself. And the artist just saw such love in this, such compassion, such intimacy. It was just an act of love that she was connecting with her husband in that way. So this painting was up in one of the gallery showings, and she heard someone say, "Oh, isn't it just such a shame those two are in wheelchairs? This must be such a terrible life." And you see, there was a projection there of what that person imagined it would be to be in a wheelchair, or to be in a marriage where both partners were in a wheelchair. But that was not really seeing, was it? I mean, it was just seeing a projection. And it certainly wasn't seeing the love and the tenderness that the artist had seen as she made this portrait of the two of them. And I'll just give you one other example. There were lots of examples in this book of both the drawings themselves and the reactions that often came. But another was a woman, very, very short woman, who was an actor. And she had a whole wardrobe full of costumes from various roles that she had played as an actor. And so the portrait of her was of this really happy woman with tons of, the closet doors open and there are tons of costumes strewn about the room. And she's just having a grand time with all these costumes. And then as somebody was looking at this portrait of her, they said, "Wow, she looks so happy, but isn't she a midget?" As though a midget could not be happy, right? So those are just two of the many, many examples of the way that we project. And a couple of you may have heard this story before, but about 16 years ago, my daughter had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and went through chemo and so forth and so on. But in the night that she had her head shaved because she was losing her hair, and her husband had his shaved as well in solidarity, in that evening that we thought was going to be so sad and so difficult, it was joyous, because there was something that just happened when my daughter no longer had, and her hair was lower than her waist. It was very long, beautiful, shiny hair. When she had no hair, she couldn't nurse her young baby anymore, her young child at that time, because of chemo. She couldn't be a singer performer as she is, and a voice teacher as she is. All of these things, all of these ways that she had identified herself were taken in those moments. They were gone, temporarily. Thank heavens. But nonetheless, they were gone. But in that moment, there was this incredible sense of freedom, this incredible sense of joy of discovering for herself what she was without all of these additions. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm I'm a cook, I'm a healthy person, I can go to the park anytime I want, I can teach voice, I can sing on stage. All of those ways that she defined herself were gone, and she was just incredibly radiant. That's all I can say. And it's not as though it wasn't difficult before, difficult after, but in that moment, it was not. It was just radiance and joy. However, for those of you who know anything about certain kinds of chemo, if your immune system is being taken back to zero, you have to be very careful of infection. So if there's any fever, you have to go to the hospital immediately. And so very soon after this experience of just everything falling away, she did spike a fever and we had to go to the hospital immediately. And so she was in the hospital room, still feeling the freedom, basically, feeling this sense of unexpected joy and a sense of radiance at what was here when everything else seemed to be falling away. And I'll never forget this as long as I live. So we're in this sense, she and I, I'm in the room with her, and the social worker comes in and she says right off the bat, "Oh, this must be so terrible for you. This must be such an awful thing," without ever asking how it actually was, And how often we do that, right? We project what we think someone's feeling based on our idea of what it would be without ever checking it out. Now, there's empathy where you actually know, but even there, you can still check it out. You can still ask, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Before you say, oh, I know just how you feel, because frankly, you don't. None of us do. It's not to say we can't feel connected or empathetic or even energetically resonant, because sometimes it's quite easy to feel the contraction in your body when someone that you're sitting with is also feeling contraction. But it's wise, even in that case where there's such a resonance with energy that you feel like it still is wise to ask, what are you feeling in your gut right now? What are you feeling in your heart? I feel heaviness here. I'm wondering how you're feeling. Those kinds of ways of approaching without, oh, I know just how you feel. And a lot of times with people who are grieving, people don't know what to say, and so sort of inane things come forth, often that aren't helpful at all when somebody really wants to just be able to be grieving, just to be able to be sad or angry or whatever, So part of our trying to be helpful is often a projection either based on our own discomfort or a projection based on a preconception that we have of what it must be like for someone else without really knowing. So if you're there in the present moment, you can ask. You can be interested. You can be more interested in what the apparent other is saying or feeling than your own response. Because have you ever been in, we've all been in conversations where you realize that you're talking, but someone else is really just sitting there thinking about their response. You know what I mean? And maybe it's been the other way, somebody has been talking and all you're doing is thinking about how you're going to respond. You're not actually listening. And so, this openness of listening, this openness of perceiving, this openness of feeling, intuiting, sensing, from a mind that's willing not to know, but to become interested in finding out. And even if we feel like we're insulted, there's a thought that feels like there's something that needs to be protected or hurt that's based on an image. And an example of this for me, last night, I'm a sports fan, certain sports, basketball and baseball. So last night where I live in San Francisco, both the San Francisco Giants were playing the Dodgers, and the Golden State Warriors basketball team was playing the Memphis team for a chance to be in the playoffs. And I was switching between these channels because both of the games were of interest to me. And there was a Dodgers pitcher who, you know, when he was finally taken out of the game, and he pitched a great game, and the Giants actually lost 2-1, I think. But at any rate, when he was coming off the mound, it was at the Giants stadium, and there was just these loud boos, boo, 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 you know, because this guy had pitched really well and the Giants were not ahead at that point. Anyway, the pitcher just cupped his hand behind his ear and just like was saying, come on, more boos, more boos. And of course that created more boos, right? People were really responding. This just seemed like such an arrogant thing to do. But actually, I listened to his interview after the game, this Dodgers pitcher, and someone mentioned that, and he said, and I kind of had to appreciate him in a way that I might not have earlier. He said, you know, if you're gonna boo, I just think it should be as loud as possible, because that really gets me going. I mean, he didn't have the sense of, oh, I'm such a terrible person, or they didn't like the way I pitched, or that. I mean, it wasn't about his self-image. It was just, hey, have at it. Come ahead. You know, there wasn't this sense of it's about a me. At least that's my projection. I don't know what he was really feeling, but you get the idea that we have an image of how we want to be seen, right? And sometimes we're not seen the way that we like to be seen, and maybe for good reason, maybe not for good reason. But if we're just simply in this open space where we're not identified so tightly with the me that's separate and has to protect an image, then the response can just be what it is, because you realize that response is coming from how it is over there. It's not coming from what I truly am. And so this is where Don't Know Mind can be incredibly helpful in our human relationships, because we so often feel in our conflicting relationships, let me put it that way, we feel that we're not understood. But are we willing to understand? Do we know where someone else is coming from? Are we curious? Do we know what the circumstances were in that person's life in that moment? You know, what the causes and conditions might have been, how they might have felt based on something that had nothing to do with their interaction with the one we're taking to be ourselves. So this is where openness to don't know. I don't really know how it is for you right now. Are you interested in finding out? You know, are you interested in listening, or are you just interested in reacting? So Don't Know Mind can have a wonderful open sense. And there have been, I used to work as a therapist for 50 some years. I just recently retired from that business. But I remember talking to couples who maybe had split up, but they had kids. And so they came back maybe to work on something about the kids long after they'd split. And I remember, you know, a couple times where they both partners said, you know, if I knew then what I know now, I don't think we would have had to split. And it feels like part of that was just the freedom to be honest, not honest about you, what's all the wrong things, what are the wrong things about you, but honest about our own vulnerability, honest about our own fears, you know, honest about not feeling loved or appreciated, even though that may not have been one's intent at all. They may have been in their own world, in their own fear, in their own, you know, whatever. So we're attached to this view of a permanency and security, but what's permanent? You know, is there anything permanent about our life and form? It's changing constantly, isn't it? You know, our health, our ideas, our sensations, our age, the wrinkles in our face. I mean, it's changing all the time. But there's something that doesn't change or doesn't appear to change. There's some constancy or continuity of what we are. And that's worth looking into. What is it that's been here for every experience in your life? Whether it's a good experience or a bad experience from the mind's perspective. So relationship, ultimately speaking, is with ourself, because the self encompasses everything and everyone else. And there's another little Taoist story. I got into the Taoists this week, so forgive me if that's not your thing, but they seem to write about this topic. And here's one. It says, without the concept of an other, there is no separate I. Without a concept of other, there is no separate I. Without the sense of an I, nothing can be seen as other. There is some power that determines things, but I don't know what it is. It has no form or substance, acts without doing, keeps the whole universe in order, and seems to get along perfectly well without me. Have you ever noticed that life seems to get along perfectly well without the me? So what is that? As this one says, I don't know what it is. It doesn't have a form or substance. It seems to act without doing. See, things are just happening, including our own experiences just happening. But it seems to keep the whole universe in its order. So if we don't have that concept of a separate I, it doesn't mean we don't have a sense of I. We all have a sense of I. And we have a sense of an identified I as well. You know, we wouldn't know who was hungry or who needed to go to the bathroom if we didn't have some identification with this particular body mind. On the other hand, that doesn't mean we're separate. And in some of these exercises that we've done, both last weekend and today, you know, when you don't really bring into the moment these ideas of a separate something and a separate someone, when there's just the looking, just the openness, just the innocent gazing without the thoughts and the opinions and the beliefs and the judgments and liking and disliking front and center, when those are in the background, so to speak. Some of us have had experience, I know because you've spoken about it, where, you know, the separation dissolved even temporarily. And in those moments, there's no separate seeing, but there's seeing. And these are awakened moments where what we would call the seer, this which is aware in you, awake in you, what sees through your eyes, and the seeing itself, and what's seen, they just collapse into each other. And then there's just this. And sometimes that's possible to experience in relationship with a so-called other. But we have to be willing, in a sense, to let don't know into some of these moments where we're in a situation with another person. So I want to just invite a little experience. Well, I don't know if I'm inviting the experience. I'm going to invite you to remember an experience with someone who you have had conflict with. So you might just close your eyes for this little exercise. And even though it might be a person with whom you feel like you've had years worth of conflict, see if you can just pin it down in this little exercise to a moment that you remember of conflict. So just take a moment or two and see what moment you want to look upon, perhaps with fresh eyes. That's what we're going to invite ourselves to do. We've all had moments where we might have felt betrayed or misunderstood or judged unjustly or whatever. So when you have this moment of apparent conflict, more clearly defined in your own mind and your memory right now, see if you can look at that moment or that interaction with that person from don't know mind. Do I really know what motivates this person? Do I really know what was going on with them in that moment? I know how I interpreted it, but did I actually know? Can I not know, even for a few moments? Can I look at that person or that situation from a more open perspective? One that isn't so quick to judge and analyze and blame or shame either self or apparent other. What would it be like in that situation, even for a moment or two, not to have the conclusion we had, but to be open? It doesn't mean you'll come to a different conclusion. It's just that you're open. You don't actually know, even though you thought you did. Can you be absolutely sure that you know? And maybe something is going to really just hold on tight. Nope, this is my view. I'm sticking to it. I'm attached to it. Nobody's going to pry it away. No one can, actually. If you want to hold on, that's your right to hold on. But even for a few moments, see what it would be like not to hold on to your view. And I'll just give us all a few minutes to bring this into view, into consciousness, and see what it would be like to encounter the same moment or this same person or even these same feelings from a place that's open to not knowing. Can I see the image that I brought to this situation? Can I see that I perhaps was relating to an image? Not the human being. Can we imagine even that we might have been looking at simply an expression of ourself? An expression we may or may not have felt resonant with, but nonetheless, an expression of what we are. Does it change anything? Does it soften anything? Just a willingness to be open, to not know, to want to find out. What if we came to that moment or one like it without our own image, without our own mask? Would there be the same hurt or sense of insult if we weren't identified with an image of a self, ourself, that self, that apparent other, that apparent I, separate from the apparent other? What if that divide were to collapse even for a moment or two? And we were to see it from a different perspective. Perhaps seeing that our points of view, our mind's point of view, might say very little about that which is viewing itself through our viewing points, through the apparatus of each of our vessels of the one without a second. And what if we came to this moment or this kind of moment without attempting to suppress, explain, analyze, judge? Even if all those things also seem to be happening. What if we didn't just attach truth, something called truth, to these mind activities, even when they occur? So we all have this very narrow memory channel that's filled with ideas and feelings and emotions and judgments. But can we see how this has replaced so often an open awareness, an open curiosity? And if it is the case that this entire exercise has been met in your mind with resistance, that's okay. But can you become interested in the resistance? What is this resistance made of? What is its function? What does it let us continue to believe? How might it allow us to continue to feel separate? Can we see how important that might be to a certain dimension of our mind? We're not asking you to repress or deny any experience, but merely to possibly see it without the same degree of judgment and analysis and belief that at one point was present. And so maybe whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes and we can begin to share a little bit, perhaps, of what we might have learned or discovered or been in resistance to, whatever. It's all good. It's all learning. Lee.
So it occurred to me when you asked us to pay attention or focus on the resistance, I realized that resistance, any resistance is just an opinion after the fact. It's like an afterthought. So when I'm here, just being here now, that is being here, if there's any resistance, it's about what's already happened. Like someone complaining about the weather, it's already happened. And that every piece of resistance is just, as I say, sort of an afterthought. It's not being present, because any opinion or interpretation you have is about what already is.
It's an addition, isn't it? in addition to just the bare what is of the moment, whether it's weather or.
And it's not even my resistance or my opinion. It's really the opinion of the conditioned person.
Yeah, the conditioned mind. Yeah. And we've all been conditioned to have resistances in various things, you know. There are little kids who were totally fascinated by snakes or spiders until a parent told them that was terrible and they should be quite afraid of a snake or a spider or a lightning storm or whatever, you know. So we're conditioned in our fears and we're conditioned in our resistance. Now, resistance doesn't mean that that we have to judge a moment that's just simply moving as functioning to keep us safe. Oh, I'm just in resistance to this bus coming right at my body. Oh, I shouldn't be resisting. Well, no, life will function to get you out of the way if it is possible. So we're not making resistance anything that is not in the intelligence and wisdom of our true nature. But yeah, you're right. You know, the resistance itself is to what is, just to bear what is. It's like thinking that it should be other, even if it's already been. And the mind is almost always thinking that if I don't resist, well, then it's going to happen again. You know, I have to resist what's already been if I want to avoid it in the future. But the resistance to what is doesn't say anything about the future. It really doesn't. There were, when Stephen Levine was living, he did a lot of workshops on death and dying. And one of the things he asked people to do is to imagine their own death. And some people were quite frightened. There was a lot of resistance. They said, no, if I picture my own death, then it's going to happen. And his response was, do you know, I've pictured my own enlightenment 1,000 times, but that doesn't mean it's happened. You know? So anyway, but yeah. Was there any, for you, Lee, was there any shift in whatever situation or experience that you brought to mind?
Yes, it was conflict with my wife. And I realized that, just as you said, I'm bringing my own image of what I'm thinking. And when that falls away, then I can absolutely see things from her perspective, because that's the only thing left.
Yes, great. Yeah. Relationships would be very improved if we had more moments like that, for sure. What else? What else came up for any of you? Yeah, Ben.
So I did this, I had just a month or two ago, I had a big fight with a friend of 15 years that was really quite painful and has continued to be. And I liked, one of the things that I really liked about this exercise was it was like, there was not like a, and it's all resolved kind of moment, you know. It was just like, oh no, okay, it's like these little things like, oh, okay, I don't have to see him as the bad guy. Okay, I see how I'm doing the same thing that he's doing. Okay, I can just feel the sorrow of this situation rather than getting, like, I can just feel that this is sad.
Yeah.
And it like, that's the thing to be feeling, actually. More so than like how it sort of gets my blood up, so to speak. So I think I don't know. I liked that it felt subtle in a way. Like it didn't totally reconfigure the whole thing or like tell me exactly what I need to do to reconcile or anything like that. But it just softened things.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't about coming to some different resolution necessarily. It was really about what you're talking about. Is it possible to see a bit differently when I'm just open to not knowing? And you bring up such a good point in the sense of when we feel sadness, when we feel vulnerability, frequently the well-used and quite effective defense is anger. And if we start getting interested in what's underneath the anger, we will, like you did, often come to sadness. It just feels sad to feel that separate from my dear friend. It feels sad not to be connected in that moment because we've had so many moments of connection. Yeah. Yeah. And those just subtle things are important things. It feels like, just even the tiniest shift can open our mind to other possibilities. Yeah. So Len, you had your hand up also?
Yes. When my partner is not liking something about me or something I did, for some reason I've come into the habit of I listen, and instead of reacting to her, I respond inside by thinking, what was I doing? What was she doing? She's usually just complaining about something I did or didn't do, and so I sit there and listen and let her just go on, and kind of I'm agreeing with her in my mind when she says something that's true. I don't respond with words. I just kind of listen, and thoughts pop up about my past behavior and hers, and I don't have a response other than saying, "You're right."
And how does that work in the relationship?
Well, she wants a response.
Ah. So
But
is this your way of avoiding the possibility of conflict? Or do you really just keep seeing that she's right?
Well, it's almost always the same thing, the same things that she complains about. So, and I recognize that the things she complains about me, I'm not changing. Not that I'm putting up a barrier to change, but just I recognize that she says the same things, said the same things 6 months ago and 8 months ago and so forth. So I feel like I'm separate from I don't get angry. I don't get upset. I'm just listening. And at the same time, paying attention to what's the truth of what she's saying.
Mm-hmm.
But do I respond, not respond? I don't like conflict. I definitely don't like conflict, and she doesn't either. But I can't always answer. I can't usually answer what she says, except to say, "Yeah, you're right. I can see how you're saying that."
Well, so often in our relationships, and this seems particularly true of parents and children, but also of adults too. We imagine that if someone were listening to us, they would agree with us. And agreeing with us would mean they would change their behavior. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. And with kids especially, it's, you'll hear parents saying, "You're just not listening to me." But really, they heard you perfectly well. They just weren't going to change. Do you know?
Yeah.
So when you come across these personality differences or behavioral differences or whatever, sometimes somebody's amenable to seeing if it can be changed, and sometimes they're not. And so it's almost like, if we're talking about awakening, could this, that, or the other thing be here and still be, and you'd still be awake? And so it's kind of like that in relationships as well. Could this, that, or the other thing be here and we could still feel connected or loving, even though I'd love it if this were different, or you'd love it if this were different.
Right.
That sort of thing. What can we accept? It reminds me of an example in my relationship with my now deceased husband, but we would have the things that would bug us, and he would be bugged that my desk was always so messy, because he was one who always had a clear desk, open space, everything in its place. And what would bug me over and over again, he would take morning runs. Most mornings he would go out for a run, and he always wore a baseball cap. When he came back from his morning run to take a shower, he'd put his baseball cap on the bathroom doorknob, so that every time you opened the door, the baseball cap would fall on the floor. And I would think, isn't there someplace else you could put the baseball cap that didn't fall on the floor? And over. How could you possibly find anything in your desk that's so messy? So these were two things that were kind of annoying, for either of us in different ways. And so one Christmas, we decided the gift we would give each other is, I would never complain about the baseball cap, and he would never complain about the desk. It was the greatest gift we gave each other that year. It just completely erased a whole host of annoying moments. And in fact, when there wasn't any resisting to what, was supposed to be different, I'm not saying my desk got clean, but his baseball cap did find a different location. So at any rate, that's another way that we can be with our differences. Is, okay, I realize this is how it is for you. This is how it is for me. What if I just accepted that? Now, if somebody were hitting me every day, I would not be inclined to say, well, let's just accept that. That would not be true for me. But these smaller things that we can have fights about, in the ultimate scheme of things, how important are they? Really, how important are they? So yeah, the thing that interests me, though, in terms of what you're saying, Lynn, is that she wants you to have a response. And so maybe, I don't know if you've asked, what response are you hoping for when you complain about the same thing every time? What response are you hoping for? And then you can say, well, I can't give it to you.
Yeah.
Or you could say, well, let's see, let's try that for a day or a week or whatever, I don't know. But it's just about, maybe you each have a fixed position, and it might be possible to open up that position by discovering, what actually is the hope. Because like I say, so often the hope is that the other person's going to change.
Right.
Kind of, we get what we get. And most of us know what we're getting. We're just in this sense of wanting the other person to be other than they are.
Yeah.
And it's not to say transformation doesn't happen in relationships. Happily it does, and it can. But often it's because something has opened up to expand our fixed, rigid positions.
I
Anyway.
also had another experience during this exercise, and that is I look back at the most, I would say, the most violent situation with my father when I was a kid, and I realized if I had that same attitude toward him that I have toward my partner, and if I was just able to absorb what he would say, even if I wouldn't necessarily follow everything he said, he wanted me to, I think my relationship with him would have been completely different. It was
Well, yeah, possibly so, because most of us feel better if we feel like someone hears us, you know,
yeah.
understands us. Even if nothing changes, we feel better.
Yeah.
Because we feel like the connection has occurred, you know, we're not cutting it off at the pass, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. What is your name with your hand up, darling?
Kathleen.
Kathleen. Hello.
So, dare I bring up the issue of politics?
Well, you can if you like.
Well,
Talk about conflict.
I mean, I have basically avoided conflict in most of my life. And I have one brother, and the relationship came to a pretty abrupt halt when I finally, and it was over politics, and I wasn't arguing with him about it. I just didn't want to hear he tries to educate me all the time, and I didn't want to hear it. And I was not skillful in the way I told him that I didn't want to hear it. I mean, he's telling me all these things are going to be terrible for his children, and I said I didn't care. And that's not true that I don't care about his children, but it was sort of like maybe inflaming him. But I think that it's very difficult. And you know, I didn't even particularly think that I was right or wrong. I just did not want to have the conversation with him.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seems like it's very touchy, because I think he was very pained and felt very disrespected and felt that he knows so much more than I do and wanted me to listen to all of his great insights about politics. And I guess I felt two things. And I told him one, I said, I'm an ignoramus, and actually I'm a very educated woman, but I have never followed politics very carefully, and I couldn't argue with him. I wasn't going to argue because I didn't have my facts. And I basically said, I'm an ignoramus, and I don't know if what you're saying is true or false. And he felt that I was basically calling him a liar, which I wasn't. I was calling me a dummy. But I mean, I just think that it's some things are so difficult in terms of human interactions.
They are.
And you know, I reached out to, well, he was visiting me, and he storms off, and I reach out to him, and I basically say, I love you. I just do not want to talk politics with you. And he basically doesn't want to talk to me, and I guess that's sort of his choice. I don't know. It's very painful and it's very difficult. And it seems like you can be caught in these things where it becomes a question of boundaries. Mm-hmm. Like, am I mistaken in having a boundary that obstructs a relationship with my brother? But maybe I don't really want the relationship with my brother, but I think he I just find it, I find it problematic.
It gets confusing, doesn't it? Well, there are an awful lot of people, particularly in these last few years in the United States, but I'm sure it's true all over the world in different ways. You know, if we're in England, we could have the uncle who was for Brexit and we weren't for Brexit, you know, and here it's like Democrat, Republican, Trump lover versus, you know, Biden lover or whatever it is. And they are difficult conversations. There are some things that that you really have to come to a place of agreeing to disagree. Just agreeing to disagree, because we're talking about viewpoints, even though we think our viewpoint is a fact. And that's where, if you don't believe your own thoughts with such attachment, you can let go of having to be right. But if someone else can't let go of having to be right, do you know, I don't think you have to subject yourself to endless, do you know, harangues. It feels, you know, kind of abusive to you, right? In those moments. Yeah.
It's the issue of abusive to me versus his own needs and fears. And those are very tricky boundaries.
They can be. They can be. You know, some you know, in my own extended family, there are differing political views, and you know, we basically have kind of agreed that we just won't speak about it well, we didn't have to have Thanksgiving dinner together this year because of the pandemic, which was kind of a blessing, if you want to know my truthful feeling. But there's just a sense that there's certain topics, religion and politics, basically, those are the two big ones, that we just allow everyone to have whatever view they have, and there's no point in arguing about it. There's no point in trying to make one wrong and one right. I mean, sometimes there's a position that feels important to put forth. And if it is, then I guess it will be put forth.
I guess that what I'm experiencing is resting in the not knowing of how much energy to put into reaching out at the same time, negotiating this boundary that I've established that he does not like. And I guess I'm in the not knowing.
Well, yeah, you are. And it's, you know, it's a challenge, that kind of not knowing, because on the one hand, it sounds like you do feel like you love your brother and you feel connected to him on some levels. Is that true?
Yeah, I love him. There are things that I like about him, and there's a lot of, I mean, in some ways, my life is very full without my brother, but I feel like my brother is sort of an angry, lonely, cut off person. And I'm, you know, I think he would really like to be in a relationship with me. He always looked up to me. And it's so that sort of like compassion, but not knowing how to, when it's compromising who I am. And there's sort of, there's times when, I mean, on that same trip, I was trying to make sure my brother had a lovely time and spent a lot of money having him have a lovely time. And I realized later I was insulting him because I have so much more money than he does. And I was oblivious to it, but I think that that was a factor. So there's, I mean, I think families can be very difficult to negotiate.
Right. They are our teaching ground for so many things, right? So many things. And do you know, when you're not feeling like you need to be the one to save your brother, you know, he's lonely and angry, and maybe you're the one who can make him not so lonely and not so angry. We never know about those ways that we think we're helping, because sometimes they don't, do you know? And sometimes somebody really just wants to find their own tribe, so to speak, do you know? Where they can feel like I belong. And so many people don't feel like they belong in the families in which they were born. I mean, I may have a skewed view because I worked as a psychotherapist for a long time. So I'm not saying everyone feels that way, but it's really okay from my perspective to see what is the environment in which what's most important to you gets nurtured. Do you know?
Right.
As I've said, you know, before, it's like a fern does not grow well in the desert, and a cactus is not going to do well in the rainforest. And each of us has kind of an energetic environment in which, you know, we can feel nurtured. We can feel like whatever wants to grow and begin to bloom has the space and the freedom to do that. And so to me, that's a responsibility for ourselves, you know, to really tune in to what feels most deeply true. And that relative truth for any of us is not actually separate from the absolute truth of our integrity. But there's no absolute truth in terms of our interpretation of facts. Do you know? And that's where so much division comes in. No, my way of seeing is the right way. I'm in a group, maybe we've met for 20 some years. And just a week or two ago when we met, I was completely shocked because the question came up about being vaccinated. And these are people I haven't known as social friends necessarily, but we've been in this group together for a long, long time. And I was completely shocked that over half of the group does not intend to be vaccinated. And this was such a surprise. And it was, and there was tension in the group situation between those who felt like being vaccinated was a gift you were giving other people, and those who felt like, no, we don't know enough, and I'm fearful for my own body or my own children or whatever, and each one had a slightly different view, but it was a shock because you think you know someone, and then their viewpoint is so different from what you imagine. And that's just another example of the preconceptions that we come to each other with. Oh, I assume if you are educated and have a certain profession and you're going to feel or think this way. But no, here was half of the group felt very different than the other half about something. So yeah, these are trickier situations, and I think that our responsibility is just to be as open as we can, but not to feel like we can't take a stand in what's true for us. And that stand doesn't mean I'm right and you're wrong. It just means this is what's true. Do you know? And I can hear that that's not true for you. And is there a place where we connect regardless of our points of view? And that's where I think seeing that we're each a viewing point of the divine can be helpful. And it doesn't mean we're going to want to go to the movies with everybody. Maybe not even everybody in our own family. There are places where it feels obvious that if this weren't a family member, probably wouldn't be your friend. Right?
Correct.
So trying to fix that all into one little neat bundle where everyone, views life from the same perspective, we're not going to do that. Just like I'm never going to know really how it is to see through the eyes of a bumblebee, much as I'd like to. I'm not going to have that experience in this lifetime. Probably, the apparatus here is different. And we can either get stuck in a single view, or we can keep changing our view. But either way, we can also go to that conscious presence that's free of a fixed point of view. Do you know? And even if you're not in contact, or you are in contact, we can feel the sameness, the connection, and it doesn't have to play itself out in any particular way. But that energy itself, I think, has an effect. Do you know? That love or that connection. It may not look the way on the outside that we've been taught that it should look, because it looks the way it looks, right? However, it doesn't mean that there's not love here. Right. So I don't have any magic words, but I have compassion, because I think most of us have had experiences like you're talking about, particularly in recent years. It's really, the divisions have come to the surface, which could be a very good thing on the one hand, because we're no longer able to close our eyes to how divided viewpoints can make us. But can we see beyond the viewpoints? Can we see what's actually wanting to happen? And just like Ben was talking about earlier, you know, there was sadness at not feeling connected. And that may be something that you and your brother share.
Right.
That can be a place of connection.
Right.
You know, I feel sad, and I'm sure you feel sad that we can't seem to have a conversation about something that feels so important to you. Yeah. Anyway, good luck, my friend.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anything else want to come forth? Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I've talked so much today. Sorry. Thank you for listening. I guess something that was that felt quite important that I noticed was that as someone who I think from a very early age became overly responsive to what we might call like the other person's needs and emotions, and overly accommodating to them. Doing this exercise, when I searched for that conflict, I couldn't really find many open conflict where I was expressing where I was in a overt disagreement with someone, where I was standing in my point of view and the other person was standing in their point of view, and therefore we were clashing. Rather, what came up was a lot of, I guess, what was felt as internal conflict that wasn't really externalized much.
Mm-hmm. The conflict within yourself.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I think the way that, and I'm sharing this mostly in case it's maybe helpful or relevant to some others too, because I have found that a good many people who are drawn to spiritual practice also seem to want peace in their lives, and maybe they don't have so much open conflict. But so the way that your guidance sort of took shape for me, Dorothy, was almost like if I sorry, it's like the problem wasn't as much that I had an image of the other person that I was relating to, but, or at least as much the issue was that I had an image of myself.
Exactly.
That I had to be a certain way.
Yes.
And therefore I couldn't let what was true for me in that moment come up to the surface.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just as painful and just as unfortunate for all parties involved.
Yes.
It means
Yes.
that some of the closest people to me
Yes.
didn't get to see who I was, but I didn't get to see who I was either.
You didn't get to express it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, kind of nipped it in the bud before I could even allow myself internally to acknowledge. And so a lot of the memories that came up were from younger times, actually, is what I noticed. But yeah, just having an image of myself as someone who had to be not angry, had to be accommodating, had to be very peaceful, had to always empathize, and had to always understand the other person, and had to always put the other person at ease. Yeah, I just noticed in this exercise really got in the way of.
Yeah, great. Because I think, I mean, and particularly, you know, you see it in spiritual communities a lot, where there's an image, an ideal self-image of one, and then fill in the blank, you know, always able to accept what is, always loving, always at peace, always, whatever it is. And then the inner knowing that's just not always the truth of the moment, is it? You know, as Suzuki Roshi would say, not always so, regardless of what we're talking about, not always so. You know, and so part of coming into that deeper relationship with yourself is being okay with your expression.
Mhm.
And realizing that when, not just you, but any of us, when we hold back because of fear, or because we think we have to tiptoe around, and never have any feathers ruffled, we're actually, in a sense, taking away our chance at being more and more intimate and connected, right?
Yeah.
And so part of coming into the sense of that deeper knowing from unknowing of who and what we are is realizing that it's actually okay to be exactly who we are and how we are and where we are, because it couldn't be any other way in that moment. And it doesn't really say anything about how it might or might not transform. But I think you, like a lot of people, and it's especially true of a lot of women, I think, in terms of how we're socialized, to be the ones who are the oil around the wheels, or whatever, make sure everyone's okay, make sure that this and that and the other thing, everyone's getting along, and so forth. And then, sometimes when we begin to come into a greater sense of acceptance of ourselves, we realize that when we're free, when we allow ourselves to be free, to be who we are and where we are, it becomes so much easier to allow the other person to be free in the same way,
Mhm.
And we're always, in a sense, talking about ourselves. So even if something comes at you, that the conditioned part would be, oh no, I said something wrong because I didn't like it. Even if something's coming at you, it's okay. You can be there for it. You can be there for your feelings. You can be there for their feelings, because the presence isn't judging. The presence that you are, that she or he is, it's not judging. It's just reflecting. It's this light of awareness that's reflecting. And it is not at all separate from, nor making some kind of judgment or having an opinion about how it should be, but it's just reflecting how it actually is. So the more you can be okay with how it actually is for you, the more you can be with those feelings. And as the Buddha was said to have said one time, like, hold your anger as if it's your only child. It's not about getting rid of what's here.
Mhm.
I mean, where would we send it? We're the infinite. Where would we send it? Do you know? But we are encouraged, I think, in the so-called spiritual journey to come into a more curious and intimate connection, non-separation with the things in ourselves that we have tried to refuse, deny, push aside. And they'll come forth. They'll come forth in order just to come back into the heart, come back to home ground, as you were talking about earlier. That it all belongs there. So it's always been there, but we've not always been conscious of it. So there's a sense of gathering together. And was it you who was talking about the grandmotherly thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a chapter in the Tao that talks about, the sage becomes kind as a grandmother.
Wow.
But also there's discernment. Also there's an alertness. Also there's, the caution of when one's walking across ice. So, I mean, it's all of these things together that make the wholeness of being. So yeah, I think what you're talking about is maybe the most important place to look for any of us as to what is the image we carry about a self. And is there such a thing that we're reifying all the time, making into some solid, separate something, when in fact it's just a massive, continuous flow.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm really glad to get to finally, after many years, I think, relate to some of these teachings, hopefully more more responsibly, because I think there was a good bit of time I spent using some of these spiritual teachings of acceptance of what is, and compassion to be like, I think very subtly, unconsciously support being very, I don't know, passive or not true.
Or phony.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah, that's the blunt and probably very right way to say it. Yeah. And unsafe. Like, I think the fact that my first gut reaction to this exercise actually was a feeling of not feeling safe, which was a important thing for me to notice and then work with. Yeah,
and everything that we push away persists in some way. It keeps returning, not because we're doing it wrong, but it keeps returning to be brought back into the wholeness of being where it always was before we tried to shove it away. And to be loved, and to have some understanding and some compassion for these parts of ourselves that we have not wanted to embrace, but they can be a doorway to freedom. Just the freedom to be, right? The freedom to be as the moment is, when we're not comparing it to some ideal sense. Anyone who looks at this relative world or our relative lives is very clear that from any idealistic perspective, it's filled with imperfection. And yet, the wholeness of being is perfectly whole. It's perfectly whole. The perfection is not in the expression from any view of the intellect, but when you see from it's kind of like those views from outer space. You look at the planet Earth, and it's just a single thing. It's beautiful, right? The vision of it from space. There are no country lines or city lines or barriers or walls, or there are rivers and there's ocean and there's land, but it's just one whole planet. And so when we're looking from that perspective in the larger sense, everything can be here that is. Everything. And it doesn't mean everything is equally coming from that deep place of love and compassion, because it's often coming from a place of ignorance and fear. But that's what we get to look into. We really get to look into that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe we have time for one more person before we close for the day. Yeah. A new hand. Terrific. Go ahead. You have to unmute yourself, though. There you go.
Yeah, many thoughts came through scenario stories want to be expressed, but then it's just no reason, really.
There was no reason for the stories?
No, I just feel like it just feels like the heart wants to be touched. And yeah.
Beautiful. Let it be touched. And let it touch everything else.
Yeah.
For no reason. For no reason.
No reason, really, no reason.
It just happens.
Yeah.
Those touching moments.
I think that's really what want is to be touched.
Exactly.
The heart.
Yes.
Mm. And I thank you for the exercise of ground being home ground.
Mm.
And I was able to, it's very easy for me to find it.
Yes.
And it's interesting, often I'm there when there's a crisis going on. There's a conflict, or I'm totally stressed.
Mhm.
I have to acting certain way to respond to situations in my daily task.
Mhm.
And that's really where I stayed. But when I have more problem, more time, more free times for myself, my mind tends to take me
More time to think.
Right, yeah.
Right.
And I keep myself busy
Mhm.
by thinking from
Mhm.
object to object, jumping
Mhm.
around.
Mhm.
So I can make trouble over, during weekend when I have more time and by myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. And yet, even that thinking, has a place. We don't have to try to get rid of that. But it's interesting that when things are important, or like you say, when I'm in a crisis, there is more access almost to don't know mind, so that something comes up from the home ground, right?
Yes.
That's what you're saying, if I understand
Yeah.
correctly. Yeah, and those kind of just instinctual moments. I think I mentioned on Sunday, if you read these interviews of supposed heroes, who've run into the burning building or rescue someone from a car that's gone into the river or whatever, they will say almost to a person, there was no thought about it.
Mm.
It just happened. I knew I had to do it.
Mm.
And so more and more our life can feel more like that when we're willing, to just let the next moment present itself. Let it be what it is. Not thinking that it's right or wrong, that it's to this or not enough that. But then again, maybe we're not in charge and it just happens, right?
Oh, yeah, that's an important point.
Yeah, just like the rest of life.
Mm.
One of the things, this is an exercise we won't do right now, but when you're in that place of busy mind, flitting around, worrying and so forth, one exercise that I think is fun and often has surprising results is just to let yourself have as many thoughts as you possibly could, but don't stop on any one. Or there's just one after another. As soon as a thought appears, that's fine, but then you go to another thought and another thought and another thought. So there's no attaching to a single thought, but there's complete permission to have as many thoughts as you want. Just bring them on, more and more and more. And when I've done this with groups of people, there'll be many people who will say, it didn't take long before my mind just got really tired and it just wanted to rest. And so that's part of what giving permission can do, as long as we're not attaching, because that's what keeps the narrative going, the worry going. It's like attaching as though that belief is really true, that X, Y, or Z is going to happen, it's going to be terrible, and I didn't do the right thing, and they didn't do the right, and it shouldn't have happened, all of those things. Well, what if we don't attach to any of those thoughts and we just let them be here, one after another after another? And I think you'll find often that the mind just gets tired and it just wants automatically to go back and be touched by the heart, as you're speaking about, touching the heart. So, yeah. Well, let me end our time together and really thank you so much for joining me. If any of you are interested, the nonprofit that supports my teaching, Moon Mountain Sangha, we have an online satsang on the 4th Tuesday of every month, and you're certainly welcome to join us. It's totally free. You can find that at my website, dorothyhunt.org. And maybe after I read you this last little poem, Sarah will have announcements, I don't know. But this is from the Tao Te Ching, chapter 48. In the pursuit of knowledge, every day something is added. In the practice of the Tao, every day something is dropped. Less and less do you need to force things until finally you arrive at non-action. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. True mastery can be gained by letting things go their own way. It can't be gained by interfering. This is very different than the mind's idea, isn't it? It's always wanting to interfere with the natural way of life moving. But maybe there's a wisdom in how it actually moves. So thank you ever so much, all of you, for joining me today. I really appreciate it and enjoyed being with you.